Well, Waterford won their first All-Ireland football title in August 1999 when the juniors defeated the mighty Meath by 2-12 to 2-11 at O'Moore Park in Portlaoise. And 5 years later, the Dacia added a second All-Ireland as they defeated Leitrim after a replay in Burr. John Jackson Kiely was in charge in both 1999 and 2004, and he joins me on the line now to look back on those glory days. And John, when you took over as manager of the Waterford Juniors in 99, had you All-Ireland on your mind at that stage?
To be honest with you, I had, because I remember in 98, I went in with Tommy Hennessy and Tom Cunningham. They were the joint managers of the junior team. I think they had been there for a few years. And they'd been doing quite well, in fairness to them. And I remember in 98, we played Tipperary in Clonmel. And we had, like, Ross Mercy and Paul Foley as a sub, and Jack Kiely and Connie Bauer and Brian Arrigan and a few other guys like that. That I felt that if we had a man, we could have beaten Tip. Tip beat us by a pint. Mighty game, yeah, great game. They beat us by a pint. We should have won it. Even with those guys as subs, we really had a strong team as well on the day, you know, and they won by a pint. And they went on to win Munster, and they went on to win the All-Ireland. So I kind of knew then that, like, you know, with if we could get a bit of preparations to the fella, we wouldn't be too far away. So for the coming year, then the two lads were giving up. So I went to Paddy Joe, and I said to Paddy Joe, look, I said, give me that job, and we'll win the All-Ireland. And he did. And I looked for the senior selectors. The senior selectors came in with me. Then Eamon O'Martin, Paddy D, and Tom O'Neill, and we had John Cummins as coach. But they were very busy. They were very busy with the senior team. And there were lots of club championships and stuff going on like that, so it was very hard to get the thing started, you know. It was kind of frustrating at the start. We couldn't get a team together, you know.
And you got a win over Cork, John, in Dungarvan to really set the ball rolling.
Well, coming up to that, would you believe this, about a week before the Cork game, on the Monday night before the Cork match, we had our first get-together, a challenge match up in Yarl against Kiely. And we only 13 guys. We had to get a couple of guys off of them to make up the team, and they gave us a bit of a hiding. And we only had about 2 or 3 of the team that started against Cork, you know. And Mickey Welch up in Yarl there, he was involved in the Yarl club for years. He won a couple of senior championships with Imi Kiely. He says to me, he said, Cork will give you a bit of a hiding on Sunday. And I said, you're probably right, you know. He said, well, I said, that'll be mostly the team, you know. Which I knew. You know, all the guys that I had kind of earmarked to play, they couldn't make it for one reason or another, you know, involved with clubs, and there were lots of different issues, you know. But we picked, myself and the lot of Mercy and Eamon Martin, then we picked the team on the phone because Tom O'Neill was out. He was getting something done with his ankle or something. He was in the hospital having an operation. So myself and Eamon picked the team on the phone. And I remember saying to Eamon, what about Tom? And he said, poor Tom will be all right with that. So we picked the team, and we beat Cork. Actually, I remember more about the Cork team, the Cork game, than I do about some of the later games, even the Munster finals. You know, because Cork were, you know, they were the hottest of favourites, and we hadn't beaten Cork in the junior championship since I think about 1941. You know, and they had a pretty strong team.
Yeah, they had they had Micheál O'Croneen in their forward line. Johnny went on to play with the Cork seniors, so it was a big upset for Waterford to take the victory that day.
Yeah, that's Scobie Toomey as well, a corner forward, a left full forward, and he'd been on and off the senior team, and he'd been on junior teams, and he was a wily character in a corner forward. But I remember we had Dermot Melody from Bannacorty picked to play centre field with Derry Kiely. And he cried off. He had a bit of an injury, so that meant we brought Jack Welch from the half forward line out to midfield, and Stephen Byrne, a young fella from Clashmore, started at wing forward. The idea was to have 3 big guys across the half forward line and 2 big midfielders, you know, to try and dominate the middle. But Stephen Byrne, as it turned out, had a mighty game, and actually, I thought myself the man of the match was Carl O'Keefe, who was only, I think, about 17 at the time, playing cornerback, because he held that 2 guys scoreless, and he had a mighty game at cornerback.
And Jack O'Kiely got the crucial goal, John, towards the end of that match.
I remember PP got a great ball across the square in the first half, and Deaker fisted in a great goal against them. And I remember we were leading by, I think it was maybe 1-8 won 8 to 8 points, and then they completely took over, and they got about 4 points in a row, and they went up, I think it was 12 points to 1-8. I remember there was only about 2 minutes left, and there was a great movement. That's, I think, with Cal O'Keefe at cornerback, involved about 7 Waterford players. And Connie Power, and I think Stephen Dunn was the guy who delivered the last pass to Jacko. And I said, this will be it now, it will be a draw. But he went for delivery and stuck it in the back of the net. It was a great goal. And a well-worked goal from one end to the other, and well finished as well, you know. And that won it. It won 2-8 to 12. I think it was 2-8 to 12 was the score on that one.
Yeah, and you went on to beat Limerick and Clare, John, to capture the Munster title, and you kind of strengthened the panel as the year went on. You brought in Peter Kiely and Pat Welch from the senior hurlers. That's
right. Well, you see, that's the whole idea. In the junior, like I was saying to you, you'd be hoping that if you could get over the first round. You see, the thing would have to fall into place then. Like you could, we'd get a few challenge games then and get the guys together for a few training sessions. You know, you'd be building up the momentum, and then a bit of success over Cork. You know, because guys sit up and take notice. You know, we got Shane Bergen then on board as well. Shane started in the middle of the field above against Limerick. Gary Kiely, of course, with a fine game against Cork. He broke, I think it was the collarbone or something. He broke the collarbone. He got injured. Stephen Bannon got injured as well. So and of course, Jack Welch got injured, but he came on later on in the All Ireland. You know, to be one of the heroes for us in the All Ireland final. But in the Limerick game, I remember it was Deaker Way scoring 1-4. But the funny thing about it is I can't remember the goal he got, but I can remember the goal. I remember the goal that he should. I remember the one that he should have got.
Right.
He was clean through on an empty goal and put it wide. I think we won that by maybe 9 or 10 points or something. And of course against Clare then it was 9-7. But we seemed to be struggling against Clare in the middle of the field, and we brought on Peter Kiely at half time, and he started out a few Clare lads out around the middle. There was a bit of a roast just after half time. We had at that stage we had Niall Geary. We got Niall Geary on board, and Niall Geary started the Munster final in the half back line with small Pat, as you said, in centre back, and that released Alan Reynolds to play at wing back. Of course, Bobby Lyons had been outstanding in that first round match against Cork. He field from wing back to score. The half back line in the Cork game was, as far as I remember, Reynolds was centre back, and Bobby was on one wing, and David Ryan was on the other. And he had come up the field and kicked a great score. And he had played well against Limerick as well, and he picked up a bit of an injury that ruled him out later on, you know. But Bobby was a great player.
And what about Alan Reynolds, John? We all know about his prowess with Waterford FC as both a player and manager, but what was he like as a Gaelic footballer?
Well, Reynolds was absolutely brilliant at his kick passing the ball. Due to I suppose his great skill as a soccer player, he was a great bit of stuff. Like there was no back down in the man. A great bit of stuff, and well built, fast, but a great kick passer at the ball. Wouldn't be a great man to go up into the clouds and fetch it or anything like that, but for kick passing, he was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, a great player, a great footballer. Yeah. Small Pat had a great brain at centre back and a marvellous man to read the game. And of course, Niall Geary on the other side had played for Munster, and at that stage had gone on and was playing with Liam on. I think he might have won an All Ireland with them. He certainly won Cork and Munster championships with them, and played for Cork at the senior final afterwards. And what I'll always remember about years after we won the All Ireland, and he had a great game in the final. When the meat man went to him to swap the jersey, he said, "There's no man getting this shirt," and number 5. And I remember him pulling it up after the final and putting it in the bag, and he said, "This is mine forever."
Yeah, that's a great memory, John. And coming into that final against Meath, how confident were you that you could take home Waterford's first All Ireland?
I had great confidence in the lads because I knew, like as I said to you about that half back line, and you had David Ryan then at corner back. David Ryan is a very underrated and as a player as well, a very, very skillful footballer. Roger Power was solid at full back. Alfie was a solid keeper, one of the best keepers in the county. And Michael Burns, they could just clean you out as you know what I mean. He was the original cornerback, a really hard customer, yeah, and a great leader as well. And of course, you had Kiely and Lorna Parker with Shane Bergen, who had played in a couple of Munster minor finals with Cork, and Shane was the guard, and he played with Gail Tier. And the half forward line then, of course, we had Connie Power from the Noyer on one wing, and we had David Wheel from Slieve Go. Kevin Welch from Kilgomnett at centre forward, of course, a fine big lad, well over 6 feet. Kevin had an outstanding match in the All Ireland semi-final and scored a couple of points against us. Remember Jack Kiely scoring two 2-1 in that game, and I think PP might have got 5 points. Of course, we had PP. PP's a legend, one of the best corner forwards ever in the game. And Dika White is outstanding. He's it reminded me of James McCartan down. When he displayed this wonderful ability when he got on the ball. It was nearly impossible to knock him off it. The centre of gravity was great with him, and he was nearly impossible to knock off the ball. And he had a great way of shielding the ball. He was a nightmare for a corner back to back. So we had some like the whole panel was done. Cal O'Keefe, of course, and Joe Welsh then came on near the end of that match. Cal O'Keefe, I think, came on it just after half time around the middle of the field and proceeded to have a mighty game. And so did Joe Welsh. When Joe Welsh went in, when PP came off injured, Joe went in, and there was about 4 balls went in. And he went for him as if his life was dependent. You know what I mean? There was no, and he had a couple of bad injuries to the ribs. In fact, Damon Martin was saying to me he was a bit worried about it going on. I said, I'd worry about anybody, but I'm not worrying about this guy because I know the kind of stuff is in this man.
Yeah.
Of course, he was a great player as well, like with great hands, great player. And the boys fed him, and Kiely and Carroll and them, and they fed the ball in, and he got fouled. I think Jacko might have got fouled for one as well, and Connie put him when PP gone off. Then Connie took over the free taking, and so Connie was deadly accurate. Connie got a goal actually in that match. He scored 1-4, and PP got one. They got 2-8 between them, and of course, so David got the one that won it for us in the end.
Yeah, that's right, John. Like David Ryan was the unlikely match winner. It was 2-11 apiece, deep into injury time. He probably would have settled for a replay at that stage. What do you remember about that match winning score?
I remember a good bit about it because, to be honest with you, we wouldn't have got it if Jackson Kiely listened to me.
Okay.
The mate goalie used to kick the ball sharp. Because there had been a couple of pints up, and the momentum was with us. We were after getting the 2 pints then to draw it level, and the time was nearly up. And he was kicking the ball sharp to the wing back. He was trying to start the match-winning move. But the thing misfired, and he miskicked the ball. Maybe it was pressure or whatever, and it went out over the bit of a railing or more fair. And the lot of mercy and Sean Baldwin, he caught it, and he threw it back in, and Jacko was there. And I was on the line near him. And I said, hey, kick it wide. I said, kick it wide, and we'll kick the living, what, out of the replay,
Okay.
And no, he said, look at David. And before I got a chance to say anything, he had the ball kicked about 30 or 40 yards across the field to David Ryan, and so the rest was history. He kicked it from about 35 yards. And it went over, yeah. So a few lads said to me after, that Jackson, that was a great bit of advice to Jacko. He goes to show you, yeah.
There was 3,000 Waterford fans in Portlaoise that night. John, what do you remember about the celebrations at the full-time whistle?
I remember kneeling down and kissing the ground anyway. That was one thing I remember about it. The other thing was when we went up the steps after to get the cup. I remember shaking hands with Pat Fanning, to lot mercy and Pat, and saying, you've really made a day of it now to see one of Waterford's greatest sons up here, you know what I mean? And he was, the man was thrilled, that we were at Waterford were winning all Ireland, because as Pat Fanning, it didn't matter whether it was football or whatever it was, if it was Waterford was winning, it was a special night, The other thing I remember is about a lad from my own club, Ian Brazel, the curtain treasurer. He was stuck up on the wire, celebrating. He was up on the wire trying to get a good view of the lens up on the stand,
Mm.
And coming back, coming back with the cup. And I remember the lads were in the bus coming back, and they were all, having a few cans, and the crack was mighty. And I was up in the front of the bus, and I had the old cup, and Damon Martin came up and he says to me, "A penny for your thoughts, Jack." And I said, "I'm just wondering how we'll win this thing again next year."
Right.
And he said to me, "Christ, man," he said, "you must be a Kerry, man." Eamon was a great man, and he did an awful lot for football, and he was a very popular fella in the school, and the brothers. He just had a great way with young fellas. And there are all the young lads that played under him or had anything to do with him in school. I think they were all mad about him. He was just that kind of a guy. He was just a nice guy.
And another special night, John, was 5 years later when you beat Cork in the Munster final, won 7-9 points in Field. Was that one of your best moments as a manager?
It was, yeah. So that was like anytime you beat Cork was a special one. Yeah, I definitely remember that one as well. Now I have good memories of that one. I remember it was an old overcast night. It wasn't the weather wasn't great, but I was also, as far as I remember, it was 4 or 5 days after that great win over when Ken McGrath got that ball in the Munster Hurling final, I think the week before, or the Sunday before, yeah, so it was a great week for the county, you know. And what I remember about that final in particular was Matty Kiely gave an outstanding performance there from wing back in that match. He was the man of the match in that, and of course John Power, Snail Power got the goal, a real cracker of a goal. I think it started out in the wing with Tony Kerwin. I think Paul Foley might have been involved as well, and it finished with Snail sticking it in the net, and he also, I think he kicked the 50. And as far as I remember, Paul Foley, I think Paul got a couple of points in that as well, and Kieran Whelan and Ray Hennessy. I know this was a good side as well. Like with Ray Hennessy, I know the older fellas are talking about Monty Guiry. You know, Monty would have been, would have been past his best when I saw him. But to me, Ray Hennessy is definitely the best man I ever saw wearing the Kill jersey. And you know what I mean? He had the speed and he had the skill, and he had a great, for such a big lad, he had a great body swell, you know. And he was certainly a vital member of that team. I won that All Ireland. And I remember, there were great celebrations when we won that, and of course it was kind of extra special because Snail Power would have been a great old friend of mine, lifetime friend of mine actually, and his son was one of the stars on the night, you know, to score 1-1. And I remember afterwards, when we met in the hotel, we were having a few beers, and he asked me a question. He said, "I have a question for you." You know, he'd always have a question for you. He was a great character. What man won a provincial title in the ground that he in a stadium that he built? Jesus said, "I don't know. That never happened." He said, "It did. It happened tonight."
Very good.
I'd been involved in the building in the stand in 1994. See, you're a young guy, you wouldn't have known that.
No, not at all. And John, when you look back at the 2 All-Irelands that you won in 99 and 04, do you think it kind of restored a lot of pride and belief in Waterford football? And like 3 years later, the seniors surprised Paddy O'Shea's Clare and Dungarvan. That was a huge result.
That's right. Yeah. When there were people starting to take notice. Yeah, that there is guys in Waterford that are able to play football. Like a friend of mine in Meath, he sent me down to Meath Chronicle after the All Ireland in '99, and the headline was Waterford class. You know, he wrote it was a bipartisan report. We say, well, he plays Waterford. You know, when Meath obviously had a good side. They won. They beat Dublin in the Leinster final. They had a good side. A strong side. They were red hot favourites. But the point he was making, this was not a fluke. This was a Waterford team, lads that could play football, which they could. A very good team, you know. The same as the 04 team was a good team as well.
Well, John, great to get your memories of those All-Ireland junior triumphs in 1999 and 2004. Thanks for taking our call today.
No bother, Tomas.